Hi, my name is Julie Roca, and you have found the podcast Aging Gracefully with Julie Roca. Welcome. It is a little chilly today as we are recording, and I am excited to have a fairly new friend in the recording studio with me, John McMillan. Tell me again, pronounce the place that you're from.
Ferreira Funeral Services.
Ferreira Funeral Services. I want to say Ferrari, but
Ferrari,
it's
Ferreira. People pronounce it different ways, but it's Ferreira Funeral Services. And we've been around in North Florida for years. So
Okay. Yeah. And what brought you to funeral services?
So last year we moved back to Florida from Statesboro, Georgia, where we had gone up there to work in music ministry and do some things ministry wise, and came back last year about September, and I was still doing life insurance. I'd had my life insurance license.
It's tracking a little, yeah.
So I was doing that. I got a call from a gentleman that I worked with up in Statesboro that said, "Hey, there's a group of funeral homes that need a guy with an insurance license in order to do pre-arrangements, to be a pre-need counselor." And I didn't really know much about it, but I knew that he did it in Statesboro, and we had similar backgrounds in ministry and music, and we just kind of became fast friends when I was up there.
Yeah.
And I gave it a shot, and this has been a real blessing to be able to help families like this.
You know, it's funny. A lot of people don't know this about me, but once upon a time, I grew up as a preacher's kid. And
PK.
Yeah.
All right.
And I thought that in life, I was going to minister to others by being a doula and a birth coach. I thought I was going to be all about birthing. And I was a part of my grandparents' passing. And it was such a beautiful passing that I realized in that moment when my grandmother passed first, and I realized that I was not meant to be at the beginning of life. I was meant to help people at the end of life on the other side to have the best possible passing and to help the family members to get through that phase in life. And so
to transition peacefully.
And
that's a big deal.
And it is a big deal. And I found it to be so beautiful. And the funeral home was so respectful with my grandmother and with us that it was very impactful. And it changed my life. It transformed it. So I think it's interesting because you and I have a lot of the same background, music, church background, needing to minister to other people.
But not necessarily knowing in what capacity that might be. So yeah, that's but God's got a plan.
He does. And we're not all meant. We can't all be pastors, and we can't all be on the church payroll.
Yeah.
And so you have to find your way to be able to minister to others in whatever capacity that may be, even if it's from your home, making phone calls and reaching out and touching the lives of other people. Anyway, we digress, way off.
I mean, you're talking about kind of a pivotal moment with your grandparents there in terms of it's steering the course of your career, your life. It may take a little while, but I think I had told you the story of in 2015 after we had moved to Statesboro to go minister in a church up there and do the music ministry. My father-in-law passed away unexpectedly.
Right. That story was very impactful. Tell us about that a little.
So, we had Thanksgiving. We had just moved in 2015. We're stepping out in faith. We're going up and helping a struggling music program kind of rebuild. And, it was a big deal for us to move away from home. We were in our early 30s. It wasn't and we had been at the same church for 15 years. So, I mean, it was just really, it was, stepping away from a lot in order to do that. And, we moved up, he came up, my wife's father and her Nana came up, for Thanksgiving. And then we had a beautiful time. It was a gift from God.
Oh, that is wonderful.
It was a beautiful gift. Took pictures in the cotton fields up in Statesboro, Georgia.
Oh.
And then a couple weeks later, we got the call that he had passed away.
That is insane. And no warning.
No, 66 years old.
Yeah.
It was a shock for all of us. I had to tell my wife. It was, and there's so many emotions that go on, and you think you can be strong for people, but you're grieving yourself, and you're like, you're upset. You're like confused. At some moments you're mad at God. Some moments you're, you're like shaking your fist in the air and why?
And in those moments, somebody comes to you inevitably and says, what do we do with the body of your loved one? What are the arrangements you've made?
Right. So I sat around with my wife and my brother-in-law and their family, and at the same table that I help people do pre-needs now. I sat at that same table. I remember very little of it. It was a fog. But I know that I couldn't make decisions very well.
Right. It's very difficult to make decisions in that moment.
When we have someone come in that has a pre-plan versus when they don't, it's a totally different conversation. So now fast forward almost 10 years later, and I'm able to sit at that same table, and God's bringing some healing to the regret that I had on how I acted. I wasn't awful. I just was not there sometimes. Yeah. It's just, I just have regret about the way I treated it. I should have been more graceful with myself, with my wife, with the people around me. And, you kind of kick yourself. It takes a little while. You got to forgive yourself for when you didn't act, it's like the old Snickers commercial, you're not you when you're hungry. You're not you when you're grieving. Right. So it's important, to forgive yourself. But I think this role in this capacity of helping people plan for the future, I'm able to heal the past. So it's been really good.
Oh, that's beautiful. You mentioned that in that moment when you aren't expecting something, and you weren't, he was young, he was only 66. There was no long-term illness or anything. And so when you come to that moment and you really didn't prepare and you really didn't plan, it makes it much more stressful for those that are left behind, that are grieving, to kind of walk through that. But nowadays, once upon a time, I think my dad would sit down with a piece of paper, and everybody in the church, I feel like he knew exactly what they wanted at end of life, how they wanted to pass away if they had the choice, how they wanted to be buried or cremated or whatever their plan was. He knew. But we're in a very different time now. Funerals are not cheap. Right. Growing in cost every day. And there are a variety of options. Some of them are very crazy and new. Like we recently had someone that wanted to be frozen, to have their body frozen and preserved. So there are lots of different options. And now you can actually sit down with a professional and make a plan. So tell us more about that.
So you were talking about how costs have gone up. Yes. The Funeral Directors Association, National Funeral Directors Association, I think 5.8% traditional burial has gone up in price over the past 2 years. Okay.
Over 2 years, 5.8%.
5.8% over the last 2 years.
Whoa, okay.
So funerals as a rule have typically, kind of their inflationary rate has been to double about every 10 to 12 years in terms of cost. Okay. So, but it's speeding up for cremation because more and more people are being cremated. That's about 8.1% cremation has gone up in the past 2 years for the cost. Just because, it's sort of supply and demand. There's still really the same amount of goods and services. There's still the same kind of overhead for funeral homes. And so, cremation will I would argue
it's more. It's getting to be more. We're paying more for electricity. We're paying more to employ people. I would say that that's growing. Oh yeah, so that's growing. It has to have an effect on the cost.
It does.
Yeah,
it does. And so, what your question as far as it going up? Help me come back to it.
So we were talking about the way that the cost is increasing year over year, and if we plan, how can we help ourselves? How can today help us for tomorrow?
The youngest person I've ever talked to was a 29-year-old who wanted to have his will and also his his burial plan in place. Which
Wow.
is 29. I didn't even know who I was for this guy to say,
Right.
hey, I'd like to have all of this set aside.
Wow.
That's important. If it doubles every 10 to 12 years, if he sets something in place, then you can think about the kind of money, because funeral homes will guarantee goods and services. There's some things they can't guarantee, but as far as the services and anything that that the funeral home controls, they are allowed to freeze that cost.
Now,
So,
not
in a
necessarily
pre-plan.
the cost of it, like a casket, because that cost is going to continue to rise, and that
But they will still guarantee it.
will they?
Not all funeral
Okay.
homes, but like we're family owned, and our owner Todd has decided that he wants to be able to guarantee that for families. So he will, when we put a pre-plan in place, he will agree to lock that cost in. And there's
Okay.
if it lasts for
Wow.
30 years, 40 years, then yes, the funeral home will be upside down in that particular pre-plan, which they want to serve more families, and they're saying, okay, we'll be able to guarantee this. We won't be upside down on all of them, but the ones that we're serving more and more families, because that's how we stay in business, and that's how we, serve our calling as a funeral home.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So Julia Childs, the famous chef and author, paid around $800 for her funeral in 1980.
Oh my goodness.
She did not pass away until 2013. And this is a story that was relayed to me. So fact checkers, I'm pretty, I don't know exactly what she paid for it or what the cost of the actual goods and services were in 2013, but I know it was more than what she paid.
Oh, it's got to be more than
$800.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
That's crazy. Let's say I pre-plan, right? And I go to your funeral homes, Ferrera Funeral
Services, yes.
Services here locally, and you have several. How many do you have in this area?
9 locations total. I work in about 6 of the offices, but there's 9 locations total throughout Stark, Lake City, Lake Butler. That's going to be probably the farthest south, with some locations possibly coming a little further south soon.
Okay.
But
so the North Central Florida area.
North Central Florida is going to be, Stark, Lake Butler, Lake City, McClenny, and then several Jacksonville locations.
So let's say I pre-plan with you guys with the thought that, hey, here's where I live, here is where I'm going to pass. But then life changes, and I end up having to move to North Carolina with my family. What happens?
They're transferable. So typically you would want to make a pre-need policy irrevocable, just because it's held within a trust, or it's held in a life insurance policy until the time of need. So since the 90s, funeral homes cannot accept money for services that haven't been rendered. So they...
So you're not paying your funeral home.
No, it's sitting in trust until the time of need. So and it may grow slightly in that, but that's what I'm saying. It's not going to grow enough to keep up with inflation. There's limits on how much it can grow.
Okay, so that brings me to another question then. Can't I have life insurance policy, right? I actually have like a couple of different random things out there. So can't I just use that to pay for my funeral?
So life insurance is great. I love life insurance, but I don't love it for pre-planning funeral expense, because many people, a large chunk of people, are going to find themselves in a situation, no matter how much money they have in the bank, where they need to qualify for Medicaid in order to, for assisted living, for nursing home, whatever that expense might be. You've seen this.
Yeah.
You've seen this more and more.
Yep, I have
They're going to go talk to the elder law firm. They're going to go talk to someone that does this a lot, and they're going to say, okay, mom's got to go into assisted living. She can't take care of herself anymore. She's going to need help. And it's like $13,000 a month to do that.
For sure.
So what do we have to do? There's a spin down, and your life insurance policy is vulnerable to that.
Yes.
So you're going to have to write that over. A pre-need policy, one of the first things they're going to tell you is prepay for the funeral.
I tell my people that all the time. Hey, you need to spend down. A funeral is going to cost you about this much if you lock it in today. So please call your local person and let's spend down in this way, because we know this is an expense you're going to have for sure. Right.
And that's why I was saying it needs to be irrevocable so that it's, it's exempt from that spend down, but it definitely can be transferable if you move to Wisconsin or whatever it might be. You can do it at your local funeral home, but if for some reason somebody needs to use those services somewhere else, those funds will be available for that other funeral home. Okay. Yep.
And we want to make sure that it's untouchable.
Correct.
So that brings me to another thought, though. If I'm traveling, you mentioned Wisconsin. If I need something in Wisconsin, what if I'm traveling to Europe and I come to an end rapidly and I pass away in Europe? What happens then?
I mean, that's not a rare story for people to pass away away from home.
Because we love to travel.
So if, any pre-need that we do with our funeral home, and different funeral homes are different, you have to find out, what your pre-plan covers. But transportation is going to be within a 50-mile radius. You can find it. Some will be 25 miles, some will be 75 miles, but it's going to be local. If you pass away local, either in the hospital or in your home, you're going to go ahead and write that into a pre-plan.
Right. Okay.
But if you are more than 75 miles away from home, that's when it starts to get expensive.
Yes.
So there was a gentleman, I'm going to give you an extreme example.
Okay.
That I tell folks. I mean, this is an extreme example, but a gentleman retired, went to Antarctica for an excursion, some sort of expedition.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, he had a heart attack and passed away.
Wow. Okay.
And, the person that told me this story said, "How much do you think it would cost to bring him back?" And I said, I don't know. I mean, you got customs and you've got a lot of different things. 20,000 higher, and we finally got to $73,000 to. Oh my! Now let's say he overpaid or his family overpaid. They didn't overpay by much. I mean, you could have maybe gotten a $50,000 deal. I don't know. But even state to state, it can be $5,000 and $10,000 just because there's refrigeration and transportation that we don't love to talk about, but it's a necessity. It has to happen. When it's out of the country, then you're talking about, customs and different country fees that everybody gets a little piece of, in terms of tax to bring you home. So typically at Ferreira, not all funeral homes have this, but Ferreira, we offer a Sepio Guard, which is it's an away from home travel plan where it's either $47 a month for 12 months and then it's done, or $499. Or $499. People just pay it one time, and they know that whether they use it or not, it's going to be. They have a little card that they put in their pocket. And if they pass away from home anywhere in the world, not just the country, anywhere in the world, unless they're in a war zone. So go over to Ukraine, they're not going to come pick you up.
Right. Okay.
But unless, as long as it's not a war zone, anywhere in the world, one call and the family does not have the burden of paying for that. So
for $500, that's
$500,
pretty reasonable.
It's one of those things where unless someone's homebound, I pretty much try to include that in every single pre-plan that we do. Because Disney's 138 miles away. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's definitely something that people should have.
Well, and you've mentioned already that you had a 29-year-old that prepared. When is the time to prepare? Because, I'm 29-ish plus 30 years, 20 years plus 20 years. And things happen to people my age, strokes, heart attacks, things that we can't expect. And so when is the time to start thinking about that?
So the right time is now. When you're maybe 20s, 30s, 40s, you're not really thinking about it. Right. But most of the people that I meet with are 55 plus. But there are plenty of people. I mean, on the way here, a 37-year-old called me and said, "Hey, I just," they usually have a triggering experience,
right,
where people had to sit around the table and pass
say,
out credit cards and what are we going to do?
Right. Yep.
And so they said, "I don't want that for my kids."
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, usually there's some sort of experience that somebody has where they've seen that not work out so well.
Right.
And, but anytime and the earlier, the more, like we've said before, the earlier that you do it, especially if the funeral home that you work with is willing to guarantee those goods and services, you're just saving thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And that's the key, I think, right there is that savings, that long-term savings. You and I have talked before. I get people that ask all the time, how much does it cost? What's the bottom level of service that I can get? Can I cremate my loved one? Can I even afford it? I went to the home of a patient one day, and I was with the social worker, and the person that had taken him in was screaming and saying, "I don't have any money to bury this person. I gave them a spot on my couch so they could pass away in AC because I have AC." And she said, "I am going to bury him in the backyard." And that was kind of the gist of it. And they were able to help her do something with the body. But then other people have called around and said, "Oh, well, it costs $800 for cremation." Mm-hmm. And then then you look at other places and you get a real deal estimate of what it actually costs. And a lot of times what you were explaining to me is that someone will say, "Yeah, we can do the service for $850. But then they come to pick up the body, and then all of a sudden they're tacking on.
We have transportation, refrigeration costs. There are different
mm-hmm.
things. And there are, there are some pretty inexpensive, what they would call, I hate the term, but it's called direct disposers. Mm-hmm. And so, but that's probably the most cost efficient at need. But usually even those are going to, they might use a third party. We just, it's important for you to know where your loved one's going.
Yes.
And who you're getting back. And that's not to put fear in anybody, but mm-hmm. we've all seen the newspaper stories, and we've all seen the headlines where it's important, for Air, we own our own crematory. So there's no third party. Once someone comes into our care, they stay in our care until final disposition, whether that's burial or when we hand the cremains or the ashes to the loved one.
Okay.
So it's important, that sort of thing is important. But yeah, usually there's some hidden costs that the family's going to be hit with when they try to, go with a direct disposer.
And I feel like it's very important to ask about the hidden costs rather than get stuck with them and then get stuck with a bill that you were just blown away by.
Right.
And so I think you need to be careful. You need to ask questions is basically what I think you need to do.
Absolutely. And really the time to ask the questions is when we don't make good decisions. We're emotional creatures.
We are.
But when our emotions are out of control and it's really hard to self-regulate, that's not when we're making good decisions.
No.
So the best time to do it is with a planner, with a pre-need counselor.
Right.
Sitting around a table, just taking a look at the options, taking a look at what do we really want? Some of that might be family history of what our family has done up to this point, but really just what are the options, both financially and, I have a friend of mine that says, these are the different ways that you can be put to rest: above the ground, below the ground, or cremated, right? Yes. And then we'll figure out how to fund it. So it's a very, there are just a few simple options, and then let's take the time to try to figure out, can we do this with some sort of Medicaid exempt policy, or should we do it in a single premium? There's just a lot of different options. There's
so many
people,
different,
and they can find one to fit.
And fortunately, we don't have to know all of that stuff. If you can sit down with someone who specializes in this, it can be so helpful.
Oh, it's
because this is not my forte, but all the ins and the outs and how you can best help me. And
most of the pre-need counselors that I know, they care about what they do. They're obviously, it's what I've called the perfect blend of ministry and business for myself, right?
Yep.
Because they do have to make a living, but they're not there to just, rake somebody over the coals. There are certain, we've seen movies and things. I just watched a movie where there's some corporately owned entities that shall remain nameless that have tried to really just not treat families with a lot of dignity. But I do know that there are a lot of really good people out there that want to do the best for the family and want to serve them with integrity and serve them with, just treat them well. So
I love that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that do my job that, care about the people that they're talking to and just want to say, okay, what is the best way for us to handle the planning side of it? And then that way, when your family comes in, there's probably like 125 questions that any family would have to answer at the time of need.
Whoa, that's a lot.
And we can probably answer about 80% of those with a pre-need.
Ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they come in, it's just schedule. If there's a service involved, just scheduling the service. Just a few, signing order to pre-made. If that hasn't been signed, there's just a few things, but most of that can be done with a pre-need.
Gotcha. So if someone wants to find a counselor such as you, and they're not in this area, how do they go about finding one?
So that is a good question. They call me and we'll just do it remotely. So even if they live in Wisconsin, we'll do it remotely.
Okay.
But they would have to be, flown back here at the time of need. No, I'm just a Florida pre-need counselor. But really, just typically, I would try to go more toward a family-owned funeral home. That's my personal belief.
Yes.
There's some benefits for, first of all, the pricing. I mean, just with everything going up, it's important for people to be able to afford,
right.
To have their loved one have a good send off and a good celebration of life, or however the final disposition is going to happen. But they typically, people will have a family funeral home that they've used for years, and they need to find out, ask them, do you guarantee services if I were to do this? Because some of them won't. Right. Okay. Ask them, general price list is one of those things where, it's important for you to be able to have your, what you're paying for.
Is there a lot of difference?
Well, there's a difference sometimes between package pricing and itemized pricing. Okay. And for us, I know that our package prices are heavily discounted. Okay. But for some, it might be you're paying for services, for other, like I said, funeral homes that have gotten in trouble in the past, you're paying for things that weren't really necessary. Oh, gotcha. So gotcha. That's something that people should really make sure that they trust the funeral home that they're working with. So basically, there needs to be a level of trust there. And if not, maybe they just need to reach out to you and say, I don't know where to look. Yeah. And maybe you can shoot them a message back. In their particular area, I could take a look and try to, find, you'll know when you've been doing it, with other pre-need counselors and you've worked with families for so long, you kind of, whether it's in the insurance world or in the pre-need world, you can kind of go, okay, I would trust this person. Yeah. Your BS meter, so to speak, is heightened after you've worked in it for a little while. So I could help people navigate that. Okay. So I will leave links for people to be able to reach you and to check out your the awesome services that your funeral homes provide. And then is there anything that you want to impart on our viewers before we go? FerreraFuneralServices.com. Sepio Guard is the away from home. Yeah. And I can, you can actually get a link, from any funeral home that uses it, but Ferreira definitely does, and you can find out how to do that through me. Serve from Jacksonville to all the way to Gainesville, and we've worked with services even further south than that.
I was going to say, and you can help people pre-plan anywhere in the state of Florida, right?
Anywhere in the state of Florida, yes.
Okay.
And as long as we're standing in Florida, as long as we are pre-planning for my group of funeral homes, they can be somewhere else. I've done it through Zoom before too. They just know that they want to have bring their loved one back to Florida, even if they're living away. And we can still do that. If maybe, hey, I've moved away for several years for business, or ultimately when I retire, I want to come back to Florida, and this is where I want my final resting place to be. We've done a lot of that too. Okay, so
that's good to know.
So really anywhere.
Well, thank you so much for coming. This has been fun. It's been fun having you on as a guest. And if you have made it to the end and you have not liked this podcast yet, I would love it if you would like it. And also, if you subscribe to our channel, you'll get notifications when we post a new one. And also, please share. And if you've got a comment, have you done funeral preparation at all? Have you thought about it? Have you found yourself in a position where kind of deer in the headlights, here we are, now we have to come up with a plan? I'd love to hear your experience. So feel free to comment. Thank you so much, John, for coming.
Thanks for having me.